Ready?
We're posing.
All right. What?
What kind of sculpture?
Whatever you want. Like, show me a pose. Like, we're
Be
gonna
a
take
tree.
a picture.
Be a tree.
Yeah.
Oh,
be a,
okay.
Be a tree.
Be a tree.
Okay, perfect. And I'll take a still from that.
Okay.
That just made me so happy.
Cool. So let's just jump in. Lauren, yeah, like this is the first time we met at IFEP, I think.
Yeah.
But this is the first time like, hey, let's sit down and like have a conversation. So just tell us about business. How's business going? I know you just did a website relaunch and you're getting into you do the facilitation and the graphic recording and right? So talk to us about how work is, and are you doing any hybrid meetings? Like, what's the state of the world from your perspective?
Yes, I have done a hybrid meeting. State of the world. So yes, so I do visual facilitation and visual note taking, not at the same time. Mm-hmm. It's really hard to do both. I'm also a certified coach. So I do leadership coaching, I do life and professional development coaching, and then a variety of other things, all under the umbrella of visuals that support movement and people being able to make connections and move forward, reach their goals, whether that's organizationally or as an individual. Yes.
So cat mom.
I have 2 cats. They will show up in the background periodically. One of them, who you just saw, is Roxy, and she has a condition called cerebellar hypoplasia, which means she's a little bit wobbly.
Oh, I thought she was just dancing around, like putting on a show.
Yeah, she likes to wobble in and out of the frame, so you will see that. Yeah, let's see. So, okay, so you asked, so that's a little bit about what I do. My company is Dancing with Markers. Dancing being both because I was a professional dancer, ballet, modern jazz, and all of that, and also because there's dance and movement in what we do as facilitators. There's leadership, there's followership, there's improvisation, there's bringing movement and kinesthetic learning into what we do. So that's where the dancing comes in. You asked about hybrid. So yes, last week, which was mid-May, I did my first in-person session that was supposed to be in-person only. And the big lesson learned from that, other than COVID safety, which I can talk about at length now because I've made myself very educated in this. But other than the COVID safety piece, was that even if everybody says they're going to be there in person, at this point, you just have to plan that it's going to be hybrid, because somebody's not going to feel well and they're not going to show up. Or if it was a larger group and you had screening, somebody's going to fail their COVID screening, and you're going to have that backup Zoom line in place and somebody to run it for you. And that was what happened. Someone didn't feel well, and you can't say come in anyway. If it was 2 years ago, maybe it would be like, yeah, come in and stick it out because this is important, but now you just can't. So we scrambled a bit and were able to accommodate that person, but it would have been much better to just have planned for that scenario. Lesson learned.
And did you have the crew in place then? You said like you got to have a backup or a co-facilitator. Were you prepared for that, or is that what you had to scramble and get in place last minute?
We were lucky that we had a lot of good resources with this particular client. So this was one where, my colleague Brian Torello and I were co-facilitating. So it was helpful to have the second facilitator, but we did end up needing the executive assistant to kind of man a laptop for that person to then make sure that his voice was included. And we also needed an IT person to connect the room that we were in so that we could hear him. So it's really, to me, what I've been learning is those 2 things. I'll call it a facilitation assistant, and someone on IT on call are the 2 must-haves going forward for me when it comes to meetings.
So it sounds less than ideal going in, not knowing,
Right.
But even once you're in and the session is up and running and you've got everybody in the room except this one outlier who's on the Zoom call and talking through a can on the end of a string through another person and trying to be, engaging and participating, like describe that. Like, how was that to facilitate somebody who feels like they're on Mars when everyone else is in the room?
And remind me to come back because I have a really interesting idea for how to fix this going forward. It's a little something I like to call a meeting scarecrow or a meeting mannequin. I can't decide what name to call it yet, but we'll come back to that. And so in terms of what happened last week, this is a scenario that I'm very familiar with, having worked in a lot of government spaces where this is totally normal to have people wanting to dial into your meeting and have them participate in an audio only capacity. And so unfortunately we're not able to have them participate in a lot of the energizers, but we were able to have him participate in the group discussions because what we did was it was a small group, so we were able to do most everything in plenary. It was only 6 people, and what we did was we snapped photos of our charts and texted them to him when we needed him to look at something up close. So it was a combination of those 2 things. When he did chime in, he was like the voice of God coming from the ceiling, which is like and given their organizational dynamics, it really wasn't bad. I think at the end of the day, I was so worried about his experience, but he just wanted to feel included, and he was grateful for the accommodation, which to me reminds me of when we were first learning virtual facilitation, that people understand that this is new and they're just appreciative of the learning process and trying to make it work. Oh, you want to hear about my meeting scarecrow?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Meeting mannequin. Tell us.
Meeting mannequin.
Break it down.
Or meeting scarecrow. You vote and tell me what you like. So, do you ever watch the show Community? It's about a community college.
Not regularly. The one with Chevy Chase on briefly, right? Yeah. No, I haven't. Not really.
Not really.
So season 6, they have this really funny episode where they invite prisoners to attend community college, and they set up a hybrid classroom, and their solution was to have iPads on rolling segways, and then the prisoners could remote control and literally and physically navigate the school and sit in the classroom, but it was an iPad on a rolling segway. And I thought, this is hilarious, and it was meant to be a joke as part of this sitcom, but this could actually work. I think it would be better if it's more than 2 people online and everyone else in the room, then probably those folks online just get their own meeting breakout. But if it's just 1 or 2 people, get a cheapo iPad, put it on a rolling iPad stand, which are like $50 on Amazon, and have them dial in on their own Zoom line, and then you could roll it around the meeting. And they would have and then it's great because it's already got the webcam and the microphone in the iPad, and you can have so much fun with it. You could put wigs on it, get little cats, little googly eyes, you could bedazzle this thing. I mean, you could just make such a huge fun object out of this meeting mannequin, meeting scarecrow thing.
Right.
It's totally doable.
I like the idea of an actual mannequin.
With an iPad.
Why not? Like just
like a torso
duct taped around the head, just like not this big rectangle face. And
right.
Yeah.
It's
like
funny.
The opposite of Max Headroom. Like you've got the body, but then like this black square for the face. Yeah.
Exactly.
So my wife worked on a build out for an innovation center in Dublin. And they actually had it was called the robot. And it was basically like a Roomba and a stick in an iPad.
Yeah.
And you could control it from wherever you were. You could make it go, and you were seeing, the space, and you're driving it. And of course everybody sees your face because you're FaceTiming.
Yeah.
but I like the idea of it being, like you said, just on a stand, like lo-fi.
Yeah.
So it's not really a robot. It's just kind of, because I'm always going back to that. I don't know why I'm talking too much, but I always go back to that. What do you do when it's, a not-for-profit? Or what do you do when it's, you know what I mean? When it's like a startup and they don't have a $40 bajillion tech budget.
Yeah.
So I
You go
like
to-
that idea.
You go to
Puckett's
Puckett's here in St. Pete. You go to Puckett's in the warehouse district, and you buy half a mannequin, and you stick it on a chair.
Put it in a rolling chair.
Yeah.
Right. Put it in a rolling chair.
It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be automated. Although I know some people, Brian, that would have a lot of fun with that. But for the average facilitator who does not want to invest in a lot of technology, then maybe just invest into meeting scarecrow / mannequin things. Because once you get more than 2 people, I think the solution is easy peasy, because then it's just you're just having a virtual, I know it's like you're just having a virtual meeting, an in-person meeting, then it's just a staffing problem. You have to have a virtual facilitator and online facilitator, and you bring them together. Then it's a process thing. But when it's just like 1 person or 2 people, the imbalance is just so stark.
Yeah.
I like the idea of the Roomba, though. I like that they can like circulate, and like go out to the hallway and like do can you imagine like running in, oh, excuse me, Bob, like running into the robot, like.
Well, that was the thing with this episode, is that the prisoner on the robot and one of the instructors are having a tiff. And so the robot Zumba tries to push the instructor down the stairs by running the Segway into him. It's hilarious.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Amazing.
Well, so I want to go back to, we've talked a lot about now bodies and movement and facilitation. I want to go back to dance, which is what you touched on a little bit in just describing your background, but what is the connection for you? Like, what is I know you said something about movement and flow and improv. And we've talked a little bit with Jay Shu, who's another facilitator, and he's talked about the difference between, kind of mastering what's on the page, and facilitating the agenda or the flow, and then leaping out and really being in that state of play and improvisation and going with a new flow or transcending the moment, or you're doing what's called for in the moment, right? And comparing it to music, right? Playing off the sheet music, and with the level of mastery you can do that, to paint that metaphor for me in the terms of dance. What does that look like for you?
Oh, I love this question. And let me ask you both something. Have you ever taken a dance class or done any kind of social dance?
Social dance.
I was in musical theater when I was a kid. I did musical theater.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. Okay, so you done some stage movement.
You can see that. You can but you can tell.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that
clearly.
I tend to so in high school I was the theater nerd. That would be the group that I would connect myself with, and I feel like we would have been friends in high school.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's why I said that.
Especially with my new Prince Valiant haircut that I have.
For sure. Yeah. We're gonna have to work on some cornrows.
Something.
Geoff, have you ever done any
I took sort of low-key ballroom dancing.
Yeah.
And it was awful and awkward. and it wasn't my idea. So
never is.
But yeah, no. Other than that, nope.
Well, it's so okay. Yeah, I'm just always curious. I don't think that we have enough understanding of our own kinesthetic intelligence and what our bodies can tell us. Right. And so for me, the connection with dance, I think, is a little bit more literal. Of course, it relates to improvisation, and there's so many, I use dance metaphors all the time. How do you be a leader? How do you be a follower? How can we dance through this moment? But it's more literal for me because I think life goal for me is bringing movement into facilitated sessions in the form of energizers and getting people on their feet and moving around. And in the reverse way, I grew up in a ballet studio with really terrible, and I don't think that they would have any problem with me saying this, but really terrible group dynamics and clickiness, which is common in a lot of dance studios. And that was prevalent throughout my dance career. And so I think I was always attracted to understanding group dynamics and how teams work together, because it was so absent from how I grew up with dance. So in addition to bringing movement into facilitation communities, it's bringing these skills of group norms and team building into dance communities wherever possible. So it goes both ways for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm pushing beyond like icebreakers and energizers and physical presencing. Like you are reminding me of the very physical and embodied work of well, either embodied facilitation and constellation work. Have you heard of constellation work, where people,
I haven't done it, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah,
I've been in a couple of them, and they were large scale constellations. A couple years in a row, I attended the Integral European Conference in Hungary.
Wow.
And it culminated in a constellation that included all the participants from all the various countries. They would draw names or labels, and they would represent, like the heart of Europe, or the soul of Europe, or the children of Europe, or they could represent slavery or bigotry or religion or whatever. And they would move in this space, in this huge ballroom, hundreds of bodies moving in this space and kind of silently telling this story. And if you were on the outer edges of it, you would watch these bodies move and interact with each other. And there were names on the stickers were on their back, so you could see what they were. But they were acting out those components and telling the story. And it was like I call it a planetarium of souls. It was just this story unfolding in front of you in 3 dimensions, that would last well beyond, okay, it ends at 10. No, they went till like 1 a.m, and there were tears and screaming and singing, and like it was intense work. And it just reminds me of like that too is, facilitation. I mean, there were people running around with microphones and like, kind of narrating and helping, and not interjecting, not inserting themselves a lot into the process, but holding space and going in and, if it was necessary, breaking up a fight at one point because it got really intense between, I can't even remember what the two, it was, I can't remember what the two forces were that came together, but they were 2 men, and they were, they were really embodying what they were there to play. And it got heavy, and just amazing work, that culminates in changed people, right? So that is facilitation, right? I wonder kind of what your connection is there. Is that something you want to do? Like you see stuff like that and you're like, that's a more pure form of something, or you know what I mean? Like, what is your take on that stuff? Embodied facilitation.
I love that. I've never done a constellation. I've done something similar called 5 Rhythms. I've done it, and I can talk about that. What I'm curious about, not having experienced a constellation, is the conversation afterwards. Because I have seen different examples of using motion and movement, even taking shape, in place of, say, draw something that represents how you feel about the coming year or the past year. Instead, take a movement or a shape that represents how you currently feel about what's coming up for you. And then they do that, and then it's the conversation that follows. And so I'm all about using movement, but I naturally want to put it into some kind of conversation that allows insight and putting that into something tangible. I actually have seen there's a woman, her name is Kelly King. She has a dance group called Contradiction Dance in DC, I believe. She has a movement technique that helps groups do strategic planning.
Mm,
And you're like, what?
yeah.
How do you do that? And it's just kind of like what I told you. She's got exercises where the group may do some movement together and explore how they feel about a plan together while other people witness it.
Mhm.
But then it has to have a conversation so you can capture that in a way that'll put that into some kind of plan. So the movement unlocks the wisdom, but then the wisdom is in. So in that sense, that's what I'm more about, is the conversation. I think I would just be really curious to see what happens after a constellation movement session, because if there's no journaling or there's no conversation, then where, you know, I'm wanting to know where that healing or where the wisdom is captured. That there you go. That's my natural tendency as a visual note taker. Where is it being captured? Where is it setting in? What are the next steps?
Yeah. Yeah, I know in the case of the conference in Europe, the facilitation team was composed of not only the facilitators, but chaplains and, you know, people, therapists, counselors who were there to kind of, you know, provide aftercare, you know, that following day or two for people
Yeah.
who needed to talk about things. But they also had filmmakers that were creating a little mini doc of the session. And so then they would kind of harvest what happened, and then they would create a little report. I think the video was like 20 minutes and it was like highlights of the actual constellation, but then,
Yeah.
you know, they would talk about what they observed.
Yeah.
But there wasn't really, officially anyway, it wasn't like those 300 people came back into the room the next day and talked about what happened.
Yeah.
There were just little mini breakouts for people who needed to kind of unpack or process. Those
Yeah.
were open, almost like little mini like chapel space, you know, throughout the, you know, if you needed to talk about it, we're here
Yeah.
24/7, you know, kind of thing. But there wasn't a facilitated conversation
Yeah.
post.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would let it would be dream scenario would be doing some movement exercises um, that a group would be comfortable with, and then bring it into an open space, kind of a dialogue. To me, that would be very purposeful, but also tapping into the movement side. The challenge I always find is people not being comfortable with their bodies enough to be in that space. More than most groups that I facilitate might only be comfortable standing up and walking, let alone asking them to come up with a gesture without it feeling hokey. And it's all in the setup, but I think I'm still tapping into that. It would be, if I'm gonna do movement with a group, I would have a varying degree of expectations, and I would have sort of, okay, let's just see if we can get them walking around with each other doing elbow bumps, and then, okay, if we can do that, let's just see if we can do this next thing. Because movement and dance is the most vulnerable thing you can do with your body, other than being with someone intimately. And it's hard to get people to want to express themselves that way, especially if there's a lack of trust or some other situation happening.
Yeah, to Jeff's point,
Yeah.
like if you can't dance, you know, if that feels like awkward, or I'm being told or forced to do this thing,
Or this wasn't my idea.
this
Yeah.
wasn't my idea, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that feels like something like maybe day 3, if you're lucky,
Yeah.
you get a group of people to have that empathy and that trust and that, you know, be able to take up the space and kind of, you know, like I said, just be in their body and move their
Yeah.
body in a way. But sometimes you don't have a day like what you're describing, that, you know, strategic planning scenarios, right? Like it sounds to me like an extension of what presencing theater, like Augusta Boal, right? And like there are
Yeah.
those methods of like, show me you're stuck, and then you're like stuck in this position, and then it's like, okay, what do we need to do to get John unstuck, you know? And
Yeah.
those things you can scale to do organizationally. You get together in a group and like, show
Totally.
me what it's like to be in the office, and you're like, whatever, and you're like making a little
Yeah.
assembly line chain body sculpture, right? They call them
Right.
sculptures, I think.
Hmm.
And like you said, just kind of you're manipulating bodies to kind of to work with the embodied metaphor of the organization. But
Yeah.
to get to that point, right? Like again, like if you've got 4 hours to get there,
Yeah.
how do you accelerate that? How do you accelerate trust and empathy and that embodied nature with people?
I don't know if this might be a deviation, but I just wanted to bring it up that I did do one flash mob with a company I used to work with. And that was an amazing team building experience. So maybe this hits at the trust thing. Have an organization plan a corporate flash mob that they do at a party or in some way. And you get everyone from the IT guy to the CEO involved in this thing. And the steps that you have to go through to make it happen is an incredible team building experience. So we did that, and that was so much fun. I would love to do more of those. I actually also, Kelly King, who I mentioned already, she's done, some organizations do a big speech with their upcoming vision, or they send it out in an email. She's done, she works with a company that does a music video for their organizational vision and strategy every year. I think it's so cool. Let's put our vision into a music video and do that. So, but to go back, so those are just examples of how you can use that as maybe a team building or a different take on on getting your strategy out there. But how do you actually build enough trust to do more movement? And it's got to be gradual, and you have to give people options, and everyone's got physical limitations too. For some people, especially if they're used to sitting down all the time, it's really hard, and they may have a lot of pain in their body from standing up. And so it kind of depends on the group. I'm trying to think of like one of the groups that I've done some movement in. There's a exercise that I saw Aneta Key.
Oh yeah.
I learned this from, I think she calls it a walking hello. I think I learned this from her. She has everyone stand in a circle, and then one person walks across the circle and shakes the other person's hand, I guess elbow bump these days, and introduce themselves. And then they switch places. And the person who just walked stands where they just shook the person's hand. And then that person goes and does it and walks to someone else, introduces themselves, and takes their place. And then there's various evolutions of it until the end is people aren't just walking, they're moving in different ways, or they're walking backwards, and there's multiple people walking at once. So you go from, that's what I'm talking about, is do it in stages, where you have the group doing walking, but then maybe eventually get to moving. And with some groups, you might just keep them at the walking phase.
Right. And the idea of like one, two, four all, right, with from liberating structures, where you start in solo and then you can move to pairs and then breakouts. Just getting, I think this was something I saw Aneta do at the conference we were at, and that was the secret handshake icebreaker, where you pair up with somebody, or it was like a secret dance. You could have like a secret handshake, and you could make up your secret handshake with your partner. And then every time you saw them, then over the next 3 or 4 days, you had to do your secret handshake, right? Or it was a secret dance, and you would do like wiggle, you wiggle your hips, or do a little rah rah, whatever your secret dance was. But that would get you moving in the hallways and greeting each other with this embodied kind of, greeting. And thinking about it in a different way, right? Thinking about it as visual communication, almost like a peacocking kind of thing, instead of like, oh, I got to be conscious of what my body's doing. The idea of,
so go ahead. Yeah.
Well, no, go ahead, because I'm going to take it a different way.
Okay, I just want to point out that this was one workshop, maybe it was a 90-minute workshop in a conference 3 years ago. And how much we remember from that is crazy, because it was movement oriented. So that's the power of kinesthetic intelligence. It's not is everyone comfortable dancing? It's the fact that when you bring in movement, people remember where they were and they remember what they learned from that. So that's why I just want to point out.
And there was another thing that I took away from that and still use and still do and still talk about and even just tell stories about, and that was the I dropped the ball. She had to stand in a circle.
I used that one. Yes.
Yeah. And we would throw the ball, and the minute somebody dropped the ball, you would celebrate them and say, they dropped the ball, and you would, applaud. And it just as the lead into, there it is, into innovation exercises and thinking about celebrating failure.
Right.
It is huge to have that shift, that turnaround around I dropped the ball. It's okay to drop the ball. The room is going to celebrate you when you drop the ball.
I loved that one so much.
Yeah. Anyway, where I was going to take it was this idea of moving from like dancing to the flash mob, right? Howard Rheingold said you have to have coordination to dance. You need cooperation to dance with a partner, and you need collaboration to organize a flash mob. And I've always thought about this as a spectrum of like increasing order or complexity. But the way you just described it, in starting with the flash mob and then working backwards to get people comfortable coordinating, right? Intrapersonally coordinating. It's a shift for me. So I wanted to throw that out there.
When we did that flash mob, we did a number of things. How do you teach someone anything? You put it on YouTube. So I created the dance. I made it very simple and repetitive. I do a lot of line dancing, which I love. And line dancing movement is very accessible. You don't need to have a lot of flexibility. It repeats, it changes sides. So most people can learn a line dance if you've done YMCA or the Cupid Shuffle or the electric slide, then you can do a flash mob. It's that simple.
The Super Bowl shuffle. Does a Super Bowl shuffle count in that?
Sure. I don't know what that is. Can you demonstrate it, please?
No, I just remember there was a music video on MTV for the Super Bowl shuffle. It was all the football players.
Yeah.
So
that's from the mid 80s.
Yes.
Before my time.
Yes.
Not by much, but so we put the dance on YouTube. We had a couple of rehearsals, and you just teach it very slowly. And that's if you've I taught dance for many years, all ages, and adult learning. You need to do a little bit at a time, and then practice. Don't do a lot of feedback. Let people get it on their own. And give them time to grasp it, and then put the music on and let them have fun with it, and not to worry if it's perfect. And it was so fun. It was such a fun way of relating to each other, and certain people definitely got it better than others, and then they were able to help their colleagues.
I think that's just a universal lesson. Start with a little bit, practice, and then put the music on and just have fun.
Oh, they had
it's like anything. And you do everything that way, and you'll be okay, I think.
So fun.
Jeff, as a former instructor, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Yes, former dance instructor.
Yes, as a former dance instructor, I am lying. I never did that. I did teach elementary school art for 20 years, and there's a very similar sort of a dynamic there, right? Because it's intensely vulnerable, and they figure that out about the end of second grade, when they're like, holy crap, everybody can see what I'm doing, and I care about it. Oh no, and so I really key into the idea of the kind of asynchronous nature of the flash mob, because like you said, you give everybody an opportunity to practice as much as they feel they need to practice in order to feel like they're competent enough to do this thing in front of other people. Yeah. It's like they develop the confidence to be able to support the vulnerability.
Amazing.
Because all of this talk about about dance. I cannot express to you how much anxiety I am having just listening to
Wow.
this. Yeah.
Wow.
Just the very idea that somebody might spring on me that I need to move in front of other people is just like, yeah, no, I'm gone. Bye. You guys have fun with the strategy. I'll see you next year. It's
Yeah. And so
so
you might be an observer. Maybe, maybe it's not necessary to put, or necessary to put the Jeffs on the spot, but say, okay, you have a special role as an observer. Here's what that means.
mhm. Right. And
Holding up
that,
the numbers.
yeah, could do
7.5.
that. The awful thing about that, though, is that there's always the feeling up front that I don't want to do this. And then when it's over, you have the feeling of, God, I wish I'd done that.
Mm.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that whole thing around the whole conversation around how do you get there?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and like when Joran was talking about sculptures,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking I'd be much more comfortable being a sculpture than I
Yeah.
would dancing.
So you don't call it dance. You just change the language.
Right. You just change the language to something else so that it doesn't have that. I mean, some people hear dance and they're like, oh, thank God, we finally get to dance.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, and I get that. And I get that for some people, that is like they have come into the most comfortable space where they could be.
Mhm.
And that's important. And then for other people, that's like the least comfortable space, you know,
Yeah.
outside of actual physical harm. I mean, honestly, I would rather get a good solid kick in the shins than have to extemporaneously dance. So
Yeah. I mean, and that's,
I'm
it's
sure
a-
Lauren would be happy to accommodate that too.
either way, I'm good. I'll take it.
I don't, I'll be right there. No, I don't condone violence, but that lesson though of, I really believe in that, the changing the language, but not the process. And I
Right.
think we do that all the time as facilitators, because some people may have the same reaction to the word icebreaker or team building, or they hear circle up, and then they think kumbaya time, except so we change the language of those things so that people forget their hangups and their inner critics, and they just participate.
Right. Right. So speaking of people who are comfortable in their bodies and moving, can you tell us anything about your relationship with Jess Grippo?
Oh, yeah. How did you know about Jess? She's my favorite.
Well, I don't know where I saw her. I follow her on Instagram for whatever
Yeah.
reason.
Yeah.
And then she was doing one of her things and there was a graphic record.
Mhm.
And I was
Oh,
like,
yeah.
is that a graphic record?
Yeah, I did that.
She was like, yeah, Lauren Green made this. And I'm like, Lauren Green.
I did that. Jess was my life coach. She coached me 4 years ago. I found her because I Googled coaches for dancers, and
Mhm.
there really aren't many people who do this. And I thought there are two reasons I wanted to work with her. One, I was transitioning out of grad school and I wanted to figure out what the role of dance would be in my life going forward after that. And two, I thought maybe coaching dancers is something that I want to do. And Jess helped me identify the pathway for both of those things. On top of that, she's just got a wonderful model for entrepreneurs in terms of how the space that she's created for herself. And I think she was one of the first people, other than working with Ryan and some of my other colleagues from my previous work at OG Systems, that really planted the idea of this work as an autonomous entrepreneur is more your speed, Lauren. Maybe you should think about pursuing that. Jess is really gifted. I think it was through her that I learned and got a taste of how movement sits outside the dance studio as a coaching tool and potentially a facilitation tool. And so I've used some of the exercises that she taught me in my own coaching practice. And it's been really, one of them, it's called the 3 brains. Interestingly, I just saw something come out from ICF on the 3 brains this morning. It's the head, the heart, and the gut. You have people do some movement with, think of whatever question that you're trying to solve, whatever you're struggling with, and just get everything out of your head onto paper around that issue, just journaling. And then you have people do either some stretching or some heart opening exercises or some movement with their upper body. And then you go back to the journal and you answer the same question, because now you've activated the heart area, and what's going to come out of that are different things than what you just journaled about. And then you do the same thing with your gut. Maybe you just do some crunches, or you do some lower body movement, or some hip circles, not Jeff, but like some activation of the lower area, and you go back to your journal, and I swear to God, you will get different connections through having journaled, but also having incorporated that movement in those different pieces of your body, almost like the chakras, you know, and yoga practice. So Jess is really gifted with those kinds of exercises. Shameless plug, she has a great book called Dance with This Book. Go get it on Amazon. It's a short read. It's really good. And she's got amazing TikTok. She is her sorry, I know I'm talking off. I love Jess so much, so you got me on a little bit of a soapbox about Jess. She did this whole TikTok series on CVS receipts, and she's got and flash dance, and she had one video where the flash dance scene where they pull the, you know, the water down from the ceiling, except she pulled it and it was like CVS receipts. And I had to ask her, like, how many times do you go to CVS in order to accomplish these videos? And she's like, not that much, because the receipts are so freaking long.
Because they're like 9 feet long. Yes.
Oh, sorry, last thing, but you asked me where the graphic recording came from. That was from her book launch. And that was the first time I had ever, and maybe the only time I've ever graphic recorded a dance concert.
Oh, wow.
How do you graphic record a dance conference or dance concert? I watched the dancers. I didn't scribe anything while it was going on. I took pictures, and then I would like kind of draw a figure in between the performances, and maybe write a little something that was said. So it was it was just a different way of scribing.
That's cool. Yeah, that's some like Kelvy Bird level abstraction, right? Like you're just capturing movement. Yeah. Very cool.
Sorry, I'll simmer down now. I got so excited about that.
Well, I've got to go look up Jess Grippo now and apparently follow her on Instagram. And
oh yeah,
I'm not on
will make her
TikTok,
day.
but
Every time she puts up a new story, I'm like, you know, because she's just so. I mean, I don't know. She's when she moves, you could tell that she has grace and control, but she also has an intense sense of humor about herself and about life and about things like CVS receipts. And it's delightful. It makes my day. And Lauren, I was so excited to see that you had a connection with her, because I was like, oh, that's amazing. Yeah. That's just awesome.
Yeah, cool. She's one of the first people I found. She's amazing. She was on her way to be pre-professional ballerina, and as many do, I think she'll tell the story herself, but she got very burned out in the process. It's really hard to know when you're a professional athlete and you're a teenager. It's really hard to know if your motivation for pursuing it is yours or somebody else's. Yeah. It's very hard to know that.
For sure.
Maybe with, and I would say sports included, but because you have to be so young when you pursue those paths, very challenging field. But anywho, what's going on with you all?
I would say that's probably true. You know, I think of people who culturally are put into boxes or careers or put on a path that isn't their own.
Yeah.
That probably translates to a lot of people who feel like this is not my path and not my passion and not my genius and not my, heart. My heart isn't in it,
Yeah.
Then, but if you're good at something, if you're competent or, maybe even excellent at something, you keep doing it. You know, it's like the person who is, you know, spent 20 years in marketing and like, ugh, why am I get a gold watch? Like, what have I done? You know, like what, you know. So
Have
it's
you?
people pigeonhole you into things,
Yeah.
you know, a lot, career wise, work wise. You know, this is the idea of the zone of genius, is that you make that the big leap. The Gay Hendricks wrote the book, The Big Leap, right? It's
Yeah.
making that move from that zone of excellence where people try to keep you there in that box of doing the things they think you're good at,
Yeah.
instead of moving into your zone of genius, which is really your unique skills and talents and abilities.
Right.
That resonates so much because it's not about the thing, the dance, the marketing. It's about what doing those things brings you. And so there's something about that was working for you. You keep that piece even as you're changing the environment that you're in to better suit you. I'm really curious about Jeffrey's art teaching. I wish you were my art teacher. My art teacher always told me I use too much glue, and to this day I still use too much glue. And that's all I remember from Mr. Cayley.
Oh, wow.
What were you
Oh,
doing
my.
that you're using too much glue?
I was gluing something. I got yelled at for using too much glue.
That's tough. I got to be honest. It's hard to teach kids how to use glue because it's a liquid, you know. You're like, hey, you don't know how to tie your shoes yet, but here's this runny, sticky liquid that I want you to be in perfect control of. It was crazy, but it did actually. I spent a lot of time basically pretending I was 5 and saying, okay, what is my body like if I'm a 5-year-old? You know, because I didn't go to school to be a teacher. I went to school to be an artist. And they weren't saying, hey, this is how you teach little kids. They were like, this is how you make a cube, which was not helpful when I was in a room full of kindergartners, because you can't teach them how to draw cubes. Their brains won't do it. So I spent a lot of time thinking about embodiment and like what is the movement, right? And what is the movement in drawing? Is it in your fingers? Is it in your shoulders? Where is, you know, and I took stuff from like, where's your center line, right? And what happens when you cross your center line? And should you cross your center line? How do you draw a circle? Do you draw it with your fingers? Do you draw it with your wrist? Can you draw it with your elbow? Can you draw it with your shoulder?
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of teaching them that art making is movement.
Yeah.
Right. And it's about how is your body changing the things that you have in front of you into something else.
Yeah.
And that the end product, the only value it has is to tell the story of that movement that you took to get from here to there.
And that's the dancing with markers, that, you know, there's movement and I think that's what attracted me when I first saw. I like digital scribing, but I miss drawing on the wall because there's so much more physicality with what you're saying. I did once have a client say, hey, we would love for you to come do graphic recording, but we don't need you to dance at the same time.
Oh, they thought you actually danced? Oh, that's too funny.
It's only happened once, but it was a good one.
That's pretty amazing. Were you like, oh man?
I was like, that's not exactly how it works. But I had this one picture that Steve Weinstock, he comes, he's Joel Greenbaum's husband, and he comes in his photos at the IFEP. He had taken a picture of me doing an arabesque with a marker on a chart. And so that picture is on my website, which caused the confusion as much as it was a cool picture.
That's right. Oh yeah.
Okay, so speaking of IFEP, speaking of being in those places with all those people at once, that is one of my first very clear memories of you, Lauren, was being at IFEP in New Jersey. And you were doing a workshop, you and Brian and a third person whose name I can't remember, who's in that meetup.
Was Rachel helping us?
I don't know.
It
She's
was the light.
blonde, blue
Yeah,
eyes.
Rachel was helping us. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it was you three. And one of the things that you said was, I love this work because it's all the things. And I was like, oh my God, it is all the things. And as I looked around at who was there and the kinds of people they were, I was like, that's why all these people are here, because it's
Yeah.
all the things. It's not a thing.
Right.
It's this glorious intersection of all these things that all these people can do at the same time.
Yeah.
And that just blew my mind to have that realization that it was like, wow, this really is, you know,
Yeah.
a village of people who think a particular way,
Totally.
you know.
Who are maybe a little ADD and need to stay busy.
Absolutely.
Keep
actually,
themselves
that
busy.
I mean, I'm not going to go too deep into this, but I just had a conversation with a guy named Perry Knopfert, who has a yeah, it's a fun name to say, Perry Knopfert.
Good one.
And he runs a foundation called the Octopus Foundation. And it is basically for what he calls multi-potentialites, which are people who can do everything and nobody knows what to do with them. Yeah, I recommend you check it out, the Octopus.
Well, we end up feeling like failures because we don't fit in an organization. We get bored really easily.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure so I'm curious, and I know we're almost at time, but how often you both have changed careers as you've been a professional? How many like careers have you had, different careers?
Joran, you want to start?
Well, the question for me isn't when did I change careers? It's the question is, when did the fire go out and I stayed anyway? That's the question.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's relatively soon. It's like 3 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
what about you, Geoff?
Once. Actually, and it's interesting though, because the thing about being an elementary school art teacher is you kind of change careers every hour.
Right. So you were in a place where you had that.
Right. Because it was like teaching kindergartners how to hold scissors is a totally different thing from teaching fifth graders how to create a three-dimensional surrealistic room. Right. And teaching ceramics is totally different from teaching how to manage glue. And it's 100,000. It's like you said, it's all the things. It was like you're teaching art history and you're teaching theory and you're teaching how to manage paint and how to manage materials and how to behave and how to go to the bathroom like a person. And it's it's just like everything. And then you throw in kids with exceptionalities, and that's a whole other field. Branch. Right. So, and then, the school changed buildings, and then we would change staff. And Christy, my wife, would ask me, why don't you go to a different school? And I'm like, every year it's a different school.
Yeah. So it changes all the time.
Yeah. So there was so many things. It took me 20 years to get bored.
Yeah.
And,
I was talking to Jen, my wife, Jen, yesterday, and she was talking about this cycle of like just the spark kind of dying out, for the certain type of personality or leader. And she mentioned that this is an annual cycle. She was like, it's every year, because if we're doing a campaign around Mother's Day, I get to Mother's Day and it's like, I already did that. We did that last year, or whatever. Like everything that comes up a second time isn't new anymore, isn't novel anymore. So it's like, it's just a year before you're like, we did everything. I did everything here. I'm done. Right.
I tell you what doesn't get old: Christmas break.
Well, I think teachers are, there's so many heroes over the last year, but teachers are are heroes of hybrid. They're who we need to look at because they've been doing the hybrid classroom thing and nobody taught them how to do it. They just had to figure it out.
Right.
So facilitators, we need to stop freaking out, go talk to teachers because they've already figured out how to make it happen.
Right.
And it's all going to be okay.
Under extreme conditions.
Yeah.
Under extreme
Right.
conditions.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's who you want to learn from, who's somebody who's able to do it in a war zone and make it look easy. Right.
Teachers.
Right.
Talk to teachers.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know we're at the end of the time. Lauren, give us a final, like, what is your, message to all facilitators? If you could tell them one thing, what would it be? Or maybe future facilitators, people who are considering doing this, that maybe want to get into this line of work and play with, people and bodies and rooms, and, what would your advice be?
It doesn't have to be hard. It really doesn't. I often think that these skills that we learn as facilitators and coaches are life skills. And, we get credit and appreciate it for being good at bringing people together, or being good conversationalists or being good listeners. And in some ways, I think I went to life school so I could be good at those things. But I sort of wish that more people just recognized that all of those skills are well within your capability. They're just life skills that we've evolved. So it doesn't have to be hard. And there's a facilitator in all of us that, as much as I appreciate my role being special, everybody should have some basic facilitation skills.
Agree.
Yeah.
Agree. All right. Where can people find out more about you?
Thank you. Dancingwithmarkers.com, and check out my toolkit. We just launched, and you'll be watching this later, but as of June 1st, 2021, we are launching a course called Introduction to Facilitating with Visuals. This is my take on a comprehensive course for facilitators on how to use visuals. We start with how to draw, but we quickly move on to creating clip art, improving slides, using visual templates, doing visual energizers, and there's a bonus workshop on mural. So definitely check it out. I should have titled the course How to Be Lauren. Brian told me to clone myself about 5 years ago, so I'm doing that with this course. Anyway, I'm just kidding, but you'll really enjoy it if you're a facilitator trying to improve your visuals, and you can use the code Let's Jam 25. It'll get $25 off. Let's Jam 25.
Nice.
And I have a Facebook group, Dancing with Markers, find our Facebook group.
Very cool. Lauren, thank you so much for taking the time today. I appreciate your time and attention and your presence and everything that you are bringing to this community and everything you've done. I feel like we could talk all day about stuff. There's stuff that, I feel like we wanted to talk about and we haven't even, maybe there'll be a part 2. But thank you for the time this morning. Appreciate you.
It was an absolute joy. The feeling is 100% mutual, and just so lovely to hop online with you both and get to know you a little bit better. Thank you for interacting and engaging with the online content. We'll continue to share the social love, both hopefully in person soon and definitely online. So thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thanks, Lauren. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye.
See you soon. Bye. Okay, here we go. So what are we doing? Oh, are we doing one of
my hand
these?
is jammed.
Oh, okay. Okay, let me get them.
You can actually make us bigger or smaller. Oh,
I can?
yeah.
Oh, look at that. Lauren's so big.
I have a giant head.
Okay, here we go.
Oh, wait, where'd my hand go?
Where's your hand? It's under the table. That doesn't look good.
That's what she said.